Assembly of the Ford Cosworth V6 involves a few points that need to be remembered, a few points that require particular care. But in the main, it all follows fairly logical steps. Any gaskets that are removed during dismantling any part of the engine must be automatically renewed. That's important, although no different from any other engine. After fitting the timing chain cover gasket, the chain guides can be fitted, and they simply bolt into position. Installing the timing chain is a job that must be done in a particular order. It's best to locate it first on the intermediate shaft sprocket. Then slot it into the upper chain guide. Down through the lower chain guide, leaving enough slack at the top to accommodate the camshaft sprockets. Then round the crankshaft sprocket, and finally lay it along the chain tensioner guide, which needs to be placed in position at the same time. This order of installation is important because if you start from the crankshaft sprocket and work up, you could find yourself getting in a bit of a mess with lots of chain hanging around where it shouldn't be. There are 2 points to remember about installing the timing chain cover. First of all, position it roughly with perhaps 2 bolts holding it in place. Then use an available special tool that's mentioned in your literature to center the cover over the crankshaft spigot. As you tighten the cover bolts, keep checking that the cover lines up precisely with the crankcase at both the bottom and particularly the top. And finally, don't forget the 1 bolt that's hiding away. To refit the sump, you'll need a new gasket. Similarly, the crankshaft damper bolt and its O-ring can only be used once. They must be renewed after removal. And you'll have to coat the back of the thrust washer with sealing compound to prevent oil leaks. Installation of the damper is simple enough. You must remember, of course, to block the crankshaft so the damper bolt can be correctly torqued. With piston number 1 already near top dead center, the engine must now be correctly set using the mark on the crankshaft damper. New cylinder head gaskets are a must. You'll find you have to cut the left-hand gasket, which is clearly marked. Subsequently, you must trim the edges to prevent the gasket from chafing and damaging the coolant hose that runs between the head and block. The 2 sections of the gasket fit independently of one another. This is not the case with the right-hand head gasket. When you fit the small gasket, once again make sure you maintain tension on the timing chain so it doesn't drop down. To fit the heads, guide dowels are an absolute must. And a point worth making here is that valve seats in the heads can be reworked in the usual way using existing cutting tools. And before you refit the heads, Make sure the surfaces are clean and undamaged. Once again, you'll need some help to hold the timing chain as you wriggle the head into position. A complete new set of head bolts must be used because the old ones will have stretched. They are torqued into position in 2 stages. First, tighten them down to the torque given in your literature and in the order that's also detailed there. Then each bolt should be tightened a further 180 degrees, again using the order of tightening shown in the literature. And finally, don't overlook the 9th bolt that's located in the chain chamber. The use of hydraulic tappets means no valve clearance adjustment is needed. Should one fail in any way, they can be replaced individually. Each camshaft must be installed in its original location and be set to a relaxed position near its top dead centre, and this is detailed in your service literature. Don't forget to lift the timing chain over the cam spigots before you fit the bearing caps. You won't be able to do so once the caps are in position. The points to remember are that those bearing caps marked with letters fit the left-hand head in the order shown in your literature. Those with numbers are fitted to the right-hand head. And the fitting of that right-hand head follows precisely the same procedure except for the points about the gaskets and tightening sequences. And before you start to fit the camshaft sprockets, check again that the camshafts are set as shown in your workshop literature. Assembly of the camshaft sprockets and the location of the timing chain is fiddly. It's also critical because just one link out on a sprocket will totally destroy the engine's timing. With the thrust washer in place, the camshaft sprocket can be positioned with its crimp hole to the top and the chain tensioned round the sprocket. Then gently set the camshaft forward. As you fit the locking disc, align it with the flat on the cam spigot, align it with the flat on the cam spigot, and then turn the cam slightly so that the crimp on the locking plate engages with the crimp hole on the sprocket. At which point the fastening bolt and its washer can be screwed in finger tight. A final step is to line up the timing mark with the leading surface of the cylinder head and then move on to fit the second camshaft sprocket. Once both are in place, the securing bolts can be temporarily torqued. The procedure for installing the camshaft sprockets in the right-hand head is precisely similar. The point to appreciate being that installation of the final sprocket itself will be tricky. Patience is needed to get it absolutely right, because this is the point where it's possible to assemble the sprocket just one link out of alignment on the chain. But providing the timing marks on all 4 sprockets and on the crankshaft damper are correctly aligned, all should be well. Once all the cam sprockets are installed, you can fit the chain tensioner. Here, to set the chain under tension, you turn the set screw anti-clockwise using an Allen key. This is merely a reverse of the dismantling procedure. A final check to your timing should be to turn the engine over twice and then make sure that the timing marks are aligned correctly. If they are, you can finally torque the cam sprocket bolts to the level shown in your literature. At this point, refit the two chain guide bolts at the front of the cylinder heads. And also the two small covers. The top chain guides can be bolted into position. And when you come to fit the cam covers, run a final check on those integral gaskets, just to make absolutely sure there's no damage. A small but important point about spark plugs. You'll need a magnetized socket to remove and install. And because they're set so deep into the head, take care not to cross a thread. An aluminium head damages very easily. None of the final items to be assembled present any difficulty. It's more a question of getting things in the right order, although the wiring loom can go below or above the thermostat housing. As to the thermostat housing, don't forget that the spacer tube that connects it to the left-hand cylinder head will need new O-rings before it's installed. A useful hint to help install the water hose that runs between the left-hand head and cylinder block, a bit of soap will make it easier to wriggle the hose into position. It is quite a tight fit. New O-rings will also be needed when you refit the top heater pipe running from the thermostat. A final point that requires special attention: when you come to fit the oil cooler, it needs to be positioned so that its hose connections point downwards and approximately 20 degrees to the rear of the engine. This ensures that the connecting hoses will match. Installation of the oil filter is easy enough, but should best be done after fitting the engine into the car. Apart from these points, assembly of the remainder of the engine follows a predictable path and is fully detailed in your literature. The air intake, fuel injection and engine management systems have a number of interesting new features we'll deal with in this final part of the program. But before doing so, it's worth noting the neatness with which this Ford Cosworth V6 has been installed. For the owner lifting the bonnet, it's a gratifying sight. For you in the workshop, be assured the various covers are easily removed for service work. Among the new features on the air intake system is a new type of air mass meter that precisely measures the flow of air into the engine. In effect, it's a heated element positioned in the air stream close to the air filter. In operation, it's programmed to be kept at a defined temperature. As air flows past the element, so it tends to cool, and so more current is required to maintain its temperature. As the airflow reduces, less current is required. This variation in current is monitored by the EEC4 module to read minute variations in the volume of air being drawn into the engine. Not only is the system highly effective, it's also highly efficient and needs no service attention. The throttle housing includes progressive twin throttle plates. Under light throttle, the smaller plate opens. As acceleration increases, the larger plate opens. These throttle positions are monitored by the throttle position sensor that signals the precise positions to the EEC4 module. A component you'll recognize is the idle speed control valve. Controlled by EEC4, it allows a limited air bypass when the throttle plates are closed. And should you need to remove the air plenum chamber, note that it's secured by 6 nuts and that the one to the front of the chamber has an integral gasket. The bore for this stud passes straight through the chamber, and this gasket prevents any air leaks. When you do remove the chamber, a small point, disconnect and then block the EGR inlet pipe away from the chamber, otherwise it snags. The EGR valve itself is located beside the right-hand cylinder head. With the plenum chamber removed, you'll see that the fuel rail is a new design with its pressure regulator bolted to the side. As mentioned earlier in the program, the multi-point fuel injection system is banked, with EEC4 controlling the volume of fuel injected to each cylinder. The new engine's ignition system is distributorless, known as eDIS-6. In operation, this is exactly the same as the familiar eDIS-4, but with the addition of 2 cylinders to the circuitry. As on eDIS-4, 2 cylinders are fired simultaneously. The high-tension leads to the spark plugs are neatly routed beneath a plastic cover, which has to be removed to reach the connectors and plugs. The only point on spark plugs is to remember to use a magnetized socket and be careful about removal and replacement. A final point concerns the crankshaft position sensor. On this new V6, it's located at the front of the engine. Its job is to detect and signal the precise speed and position of the crank to the EEC4 module, and it can't be adjusted in service. This EEC4 module, positioned inside the car as usual on Scorpio, has a much increased capacity that brings a particular service benefit in the form of its extended self-test capability. A new 3-digit star tester has been developed, which must be used on this vehicle to take advantage of that capability. The procedures for use are precisely the same as on the standard 2.9-litre V6 vehicles, and test codes are contained in your test manual. Apart from these few service points, you'll find most other work precisely as for the standard Granada Scorpio vehicles, using exactly the same equipment. There are only 3 new special tools that are either new or adapted from existing tools. They are for removal and installation of valve springs to replace the valve stem seals. All in all, for such an advanced engine, its service requirement is remarkably straightforward. A feature that should please all who are faced with this new Ford Cosworth unit in the workshop.